Hello, David. I just said that everybody must read your book on Russia and about neoliberal capitalism and all articles in alternatives. So we are very glad that you're with us. Спасибо. Thank you very much. Today, of course, we will talk about elections of president in the United States, and I think we have two types of elections now in the world. One type of elections, nobody can say that he is president if he is elected, like Lukashenko or Biden or maybe many other presidents. So if mainstream doesn't like this guy, he is not democratically elected. And another variant of elections when everybody knows 1 year before elections who will be the president without any problems. So this is crisis of democracy, and I think in the end of 20th century, it was written book Democracy for a few, I think in English, Демократия для немногих. It was a great book, and it is a great source for understanding how such type of democracy as you had in the United States as we have even worse. In Russia, how it works or doesn't work, better to say. And the first question is about Trump. I will explain why. Unfortunately, in Russia, even among so-called patriotic left, there are a lot of illusions. There are a lot of myths. Many people says, and I am afraid will say that Trump is a protector of industry. Trump is protector of middle class and ordinary Americans. Trump is protector of United States as national state against global corporations. It's for me, this is stupidity, direct stupidity, but this is very popular, unfortunately, in Russia. So you wrote good articles and said many times comments on this topic. So please, can you explain to Russians who is Trump, what was his policy, if he is really or was really a fighter against financial capital and other myths in Russia? So please, this is very important for us.
These are very important questions. Donald Trump is a master of illusion, of creating an appearance that does not.
The question is why he is not in circus, why he is president of the United States. But I think this is right. Also. Right. Sorry, I will not interrupt more.
There are two sides to Donald Trump. On the one side, he is a very flawed person with serious psychological problems. He needs constant praise. He is very insecure. He constantly praises himself. He makes up facts all the time about things big and small, where the evidence is obvious to everyone that what he says is false. He has a long history of this. But on the other side, he represents something politically. He realized a few years before the 2016 presidential election in the US, when he was still a businessman, had never been in government, he realized that there was a path to the presidency for someone who projected what is best understood as an authoritarian nationalist politics, something that had not been seen in the USA since the 1930s. He even borrowed a slogan from the authoritarian nationalist, and then it was clearly the fascist movement in the US in the 1930s. He borrowed the slogan "America First" from the fascist movement in the US in the 1930s. And he was very clever about projecting a politics that had just the features you described. He posed as a protector of American industry, as a protector of American workers, as a protector of America around the world, indicated by his America First slogan. And in the 2016 election, he was able to easily defeat, in the Republican primaries, a series of neoliberal Republican candidates who focused on cutting social programs that benefit ordinary Americans, and who favored free trade These policies, these neoliberal policies, were never popular with the majority of the American people, and he was easily able to win the Republican nomination. Then, in the general election against Hillary Clinton, Hillary Clinton mainly represented what was then the establishment, slightly left of center, but neoliberal position in American politics. And Trump was able to accurately characterize Hillary Clinton as an part of the old elite that had brought free trade pacts and had presided over a system that led to the worsening of conditions for American workers. These were all true charges. And no one knew whether his claims that he would do something different were true or not, because he had not been in office. He kept saying, on day one, I will solve this problem. The typical promise of a would-be dictator. Give the power to me, and I will solve the problem. And I won't go into all the details of his appeal. It fit every feature of authoritarian nationalism, including an overt racism, hostility to those of religions other than Christianity or Judaism, and so forth. A call for a return to what is called traditional lifestyles, all of these features. Now, but today, so I think by doing that, he was able to win the election by winning almost all of the part of the US population that for one reason or another votes for the right of center Republican Party candidate. But he added to that just enough working class people and small business people who had previously voted for the Democrats to his column to win a very narrow victory in 2016. Now we've had 4 years of Trump as president, and we have learned some things. His claims that he would improve conditions for US workers were empty. For example, he promised a big investment program in what is called infrastructure, that is, in improving America's roads, rail lines, airports, etc., which is very much needed and which would generate a lot of well-paying jobs for working people. But he never pursued it in office. That could have passed the US Congress, but he never pursued it. His promises to protect Social Security, America's pension system, were empty. He introduced budgets that would have cut these programs. So unlike some authoritarian nationalist figures in other parts of the world, such as in Hungary and Poland, where there is a welfaristic aspect to the policy, Trump did not pursue any policies that would benefit American workers. Instead, he named big business representatives to the boards, the regulatory boards that most affect workers. They stopped enforcing job safety regulations, very hostile to trade unions. What emerged in the US was actually, under the Trump administration, a kind of a coalition between authoritarian nationalism on the one hand and neoliberalism, because the Republican senators who were very powerful in the US political system were overwhelmingly neoliberals. They were not nationalists in that sense. So the Trump administration has pursued a nationalist policy, authoritarian nationalist policy on international trade, on immigration. This has not been favored by US big business, which does not like the tariffs, which does not like the restrictions on immigrants. They want to be able to hire low-wage immigrant labor, while domestic economic and regulatory policy was turned over to neoliberals with a new wave of deregulating business, weakening environmental regulations, cutting taxes for corporations and the rich. That has been the actual policy. And American basic industry has continued to lose in the competition with companies in other parts of the world. So it was the pro-worker part was all illusion. That's the background that leads us to the 2020 election. Now, I don't want to,
David,
this should be a dialogue, but perhaps you might want to ask me about what happened with the election against Biden.
Yes, it was a small break in internet, yes, so I think we can continue. Yes, I will comment briefly what you said, because this is extremely important for Russia. And we have a lot of illusions about so-called social right or social nationalist policy. Partly because we have in our country some intellectuals who are not left, but who are big lovers of social values, such as free of charge education, such as free of charge healthcare system, and even a strong industrial policy in economic sphere, maybe progressive income tax. As you know, in Russia, it's 13% for everybody, for poor worker and for billionaire. So, and these people are creating, these intellectuals are creating illusions that right-wing politicians will provide combination of social orientation of economic development from one hand, and the support of Russian strong state, Russian power from another hand. So it will be a social nationalistic policy, not national, not Nazi, not like Hitler, but maybe in some aspects similar with Hitler, by the way.
Yes.
Yes, and this is very dangerous illusion. And what you said about Trump is extremely important fact, not, I don't know, our theoretical vision, but fact that such people, such leaders, such politicians are bringing neoliberal economic policy, supporting big corporations, cutting all social expenditures, cutting incomes, really speaking, generally speaking, cutting incomes and life conditions of working class, of ordinary people, and creating in the same time authoritarian, nationalistic, ideological, political, cultural frameworks for neoliberal economic and social policy. So this is in Russia popular. This is very important for Russia because shows how it will be in reality, not in dreams of these intellectuals who wants to put together social value, something like Scandinavian model with nationalistic authoritarian leader. You know, it looks like a crazy idea, but in Russia very popular. And you said very important things, that it's impossible, simply impossible. If we have authoritarian nationalistic president, we have a neoliberal economic policy and nothing else. So this was very important, maybe comment and explanation. But there is question also, why at least 49% of US citizens still are supporting Trump? And then we move to Biden and his how to say, program, his real policy in the future. So why so big number? It's a question for Russia.
Huh? Don't increase it. It's 47%, not 49%.
Sorry, yeah. It's Russian propaganda. I'm a victim of Russian propaganda. In Russian propaganda, it's 51, definitely. So why he's still popular?
Okay, the public opinion surveys had, all during his presidency, found that according to those surveys, his support from the population never rose above 44 to 45%. He did get a larger percentage of the vote, which was a big surprise to many analysts. But it only went up by a few percentage points. He won 47% rather than the 44 to 45% that he had been showing. So it was not that far off. Still well under 50%, but still a huge percent. I mean, I think one has to look at history. Germany had a parliamentary democracy in the 1920s, and under increasingly stressful economic conditions, a fascist party was able to take power under Hitler. And in the last free election in Germany in the early 30s, Hitler got 44% of the vote.
Yes.
And I think this happens in a period of capitalism in which the economy is not working normally. There is relative stagnation. The US economy has experienced relative stagnation, as has Western Europe. Very slow growth, increasing inequality, stagnant or declining wages for workers in the US. And under those conditions, it creates an opportunity for a nationalist demagogue to get to power by making promises to change the conditions that people face. So that was the economic setting.
1 minute, I will interrupt you. I just want to remind to our viewers, to everybody, that you mentioned very important point. Authoritarian leader says, I will come and I will do everything. You are not responsible for anything. You can keep silence. You can do nothing. You can abstain, and everything will be done. Just elect me, and everything is okay. Unfortunately, we have the same very often among left leaders in our country. Please elect me. I am a good guy. I will protect you. I will help you. I will build socialism. Himself, one person, will build socialism or something like that. It looks like joke, but unfortunately, this is very typical propagandistic model, and especially popular among right-wing authoritarian leaders or nationalist leaders. So I just want to stress this. This is an important aspect when people can be conformist and still have good results without any participation in politics and struggle and so on. This is one of the important aspects of victory of such guys as Trump and similar leaders in Russia. Thank you, David. I'm sorry for interruption, but I just wanted to stress this.
People forget that the Soviet Union did not emerge from one strong person seizing power. It emerged from a great social upheaval from below of workers and peasants demanding change.
It is extremely important, yes.
So to move to your question, what happened this month in the USA? The same alignment of forces existed. Trump had a base of support that, by my estimate, includes about 15 to 20% hardcore support that supports Trump because they like his authoritarian nationalist politics. They would like him to remain president forever. They like his racism. They like all of those, or most of the elements of the image he has projected. But that's not enough to win so many votes. Again, as in 2016, added to that was a large, about an equal number, maybe a slightly larger number of voters from various classes and regions who, for one reason or another, don't like the Democratic Party position.
This is also important, I think, yes.
Yes, either they oppose abortion, or they favor free market government, hands-off business. They favor low taxes for the rich and for corporations. People who fear that the Democrats would do things that would be harmful for the economy. Generally, right-wing political, or what are called conservative political views in the U.S. So that brings it up to about the low 40%, low to mid 40s. But then there were still a certain number of working class people who had voted for Trump in 2016, who, by the way, many of them were the same people who voted for Obama twice. But they found their conditions did not improve. There were many people, especially in those upper Midwest swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, that gave Trump the 2016 election, who voted for Obama. And then they thought, well, nothing's gotten better. Trump says he'll try something different. He'll improve our lives. Let's give him a chance. Well, Trump won a smaller percentage of those voters, but still some number who felt they didn't want to.
This was enough, yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, Trump lost support among the professional class, living in suburbs of cities who were very hostile to his personal style, his lies, his opposition to science, his failure to confront the pandemic. And that provided in Biden won virtually all the swing states this time by a somewhat larger margin than Trump had won them last time. So there was a swing. And it's interesting that in US electoral history, Trump won the biggest percentage of the vote of any challenger of a sitting president since 1932, when Franklin Roosevelt, in the depths of the Great Depression, defeated the President Hoover. So Biden, by American political standards, did win a big victory, although many of us on the left and in the center of the US politically were horrified to see such a large percentage of the population voting for such a damaging candidate who is not only giving support to neoliberalism, but is threatening American democracy. You know, we have bourgeois democracy. We have a limited democracy, but it's a lot better than the alternative. Authoritarian rule is much worse. Many of us who criticize bourgeois democracy would miss it if we lost it from our positions in prison.
Yes, it's true.
Trump constantly calls for prosecuting and imprisoning those who criticize him, into strangling the mass media who criticize him. He is a would-be authoritarian ruler. So this was shocking that 47% would vote for someone who aspires to be a dictator, although he is not yet. It's not easy to become a dictator in the US. Now, what does Biden represent?
1 minute before Biden, I want to stress one more important detail, and this is lesson for everybody, including Russia. I think one of the reasons of victory of right-wing forces everywhere is very weak and I can say even, okay, let's say mild, very weak policy of moderate left. They're promising something, but they're doing maybe 1% of the promises, and when they are in power, they're not really left. They're 90% center, 10%, 9% nobody knows, and 1% left. And in this situation, a lot of disillusions, a lot of critique, and of course, with a real basis critique for this so-called left-center politicians. And after that, victory of right-wing forces who at least are clear for ordinary people. And one more aspect I think is important, and this is a delicate question, but in Russia, there are a lot of negative relations towards neoliberalism, not as economic policy, but as cultural policy. It's interconnected with absolute, how to say, negation of any big narratives. I will use philosophical category. So there is no difference between bad and good. Everybody is right. Experts cannot say what is beautiful, what is ugly. Experts cannot say what is moral, what is immoral. Everybody has right to say this garbage is beautiful art, this immoral behavior is cultural specific feature, and so on and so far. And such type of things which are associated with liberalism, with democrats in the United States, sometimes with social democrats in Europe, in Russia creates a lot of negative reflections about such type of political forces and ideology. And here there is big trap for people, because they think that this, how to say, relation when there is no border between good and bad, beautiful and ugly. This is part of democracy. That's why we don't want to have such democracy. Better to have authoritarian leader, but who will say, it's about our president. When he likes dog, and this is good. Another guy who made something bad for dog is bad, and I will protect good relation, I will forbid bad relation. So, and everywhere, everything is clear. This is looks like very simple or even simplistic, but unfortunately, this is reality. We are talking mainly about economic aspects, but these cultural aspects became in our country very important. Maybe in the same in the US, and maybe it was also one of the reasons why Trump had support of some relatively poor people or working class people. Am I right or I'm wrong?
Well, I think it was a factor. I don't think it was the main factor, but I think it was a factor. I mean, what you're referring to in the cultural sphere is usually in the West called postmodernism or post-structuralism. This view
in Russia it's the same, but
no
among
right, there's no wrong, there's no truth, there's no falsehood, and some of us on the left fought against this trend. I believe it was very destructive trend politically, but it did influence the mainstream left of center culture, and I think this was has been a problem.
Yes, now let's move to the Biden. I'm sorry to put many questions, but it's very interesting to talk with you. So we have to do this more.
One thing leads to another, you know.
Yes.
But what you were describing, I think one has to consider the character of a period. And the period in global capitalism since about 1980 has been one of neoliberal domination. Big business, which for 25 years after World War II had gone along with a regulated form of capitalism that included a strong role for trade unions and many benefits for working people, big business deserted their agreement with that form of capitalism. The capital-labor compromise that had existed in the 1950s and 60s was abandoned, and big business, together with small business, was able to rapidly install a form of capitalism that's very harsh, that we know as neoliberal capitalism. And that affected the social democratic parties in the world. And in the US, the Democratic Party, which is our weak version of social democracy, they all moved to the right and stopped doing things that benefited workers. They gave in to the pressure, the enormous pressure. You know, Bill Clinton ran for president in 1992, attacking the neoliberal policies. And as soon as he became president, he was surrounded by advisors who said, "You can't do anything different. You'll lose the next election if you do anything different." And so Bill Clinton presided over the abolition of the main social welfare program for poor people in the US. He pushed through the North American Free Trade Agreement that was very harmful for working people, both in the US and in Mexico, a difficult trick to pull off, but it did. Only the capitalists on both sides benefited.
It's very interesting, by the way. Nobody can understand this, but this class approach is extremely important.
Yes.
So-called geopolitical struggle very often is not struggle for business; it's struggle of two sides against people who want below.
That's right. And in Britain, the same thing happened under Tony Blair, where there was continuing privatization and the previously very effective National Health Service and railroads were worsened, workers' conditions worsened. Okay, now here's the reason I'm bringing this up. Since 2008, we've been in a different period. In my view, until the big crisis of 2008, neoliberalism was working effectively for capital. It was bringing relatively long, relatively stable economic expansions, not as vigorous as in the regulated capitalist era, but reasonable expansions. The 2008 crisis marked the end of that period. Since then, neoliberalism has no longer worked to bring normal capital accumulation and economic expansion. We don't have time for me to go into the explicit analysis of how and why this happened, which is, I will modestly say, in my book, The Rise and Fall of Neoliberal Capitalism.
Yes, I already said about this in Russian, but
Yeah,
we
I
must
heard it.
have another talk on this topic
Yes,
on the basis of your
but
book.
it's relevant here. It's extremely relevant. The implications are relevant because one cannot judge a political figure like Biden based on what Biden did in the 1990s. In the 19, so those who say, oh, it's the same neoliberal Democratic Party coming back to power, not quite. It's a different period. And it appears that compared to Hillary Clinton, Biden, like Hillary Clinton, didn't really ever have strong opinions about economic policy, but kind of went with the pressure toward neoliberal policies. The pressures are entirely different today. The pressures coming from the base, even from some parts of big business, are that maybe we need from some parts of big businesses, maybe we better address some problems such as global climate change. But from working people, there is a huge pressure to act, to do things that will benefit workers. And that it's coming from the Black community, from the Hispanic community. All the pressures on the incoming Biden administration are to the left. I mean, even the Senate minority leader from New York, who has been a hardcore neoliberal in the past, is saying things like, we have to be bold. We can't act like we have before. We have to pass major measures to combat climate change, to combat inequality. I don't think these are just words. I think we're in a new period.
They felt something by stomach that it's necessary to change a little bit the situation.
But there's still a balance of forces. It's not clear what the outcome will be in January, but there is at least a possibility under a Biden administration of a push toward a period of progressive reform. I think basically the neoliberal era is over in the long run, and the capitalist world will be heading either toward authoritarian nationalism or a period of what might best be called green social democracy. I think those are the only two viable options. Continuing neoliberalism means continuing stagnation, continuing disorder and conflict. Trump was not able to bring about a consistent authoritarian nationalist regime, unlike Hitler, say, in the 1930s, who was able to eliminate unemployment through massive infrastructure and military spending. So we're in a dangerous moment. Let me just add, relevant for Russia, Hillary Clinton was particularly hostile to Putin and to Russia, not just to Putin, but to Russia. She really wanted to maintain a Cold War against Russia. Obama was more nuanced, but Hillary Clinton was the person in the Obama administration who really wanted to clamp down on Russia. It's not clear that Biden has the same view. Trump admired Putin, and I think his admiration was that he saw Putin as a role model. He saw him as a successful authoritarian nationalist ruler, which he wished he could be, but could not actually fulfill because he has not been able to completely dominate the US state the way Putin does in Russia. So I think it's unclear what the US foreign policy will be under Biden. I think it will be more nuanced, more ready to work with traditional US allies, and in the end will take, I think, a more reasonable policy toward Russia and China. But we'll have to see. There are still strong forces in the US that want to pursue not an America First policy, going it alone, that's a loser of a policy, but to try to organize the world politics around a confrontation, not really with Russia, but with China. The US ruling class sees China as a dangerous adversary that threatens to displace US imperialism. I don't think China is an imperialist power, but it is approaching economic parity with the US. And the dominant imperial power is bound to resist any country that appears to be rising to become an equal. So the international situation will be very complex in the years ahead, but there are real hopes for a better direction domestically in the US, in my view.
So, David, before we will end our talk, and I promise that I do my best to invite David Kotz for a new dialogue about post-neoliberal era, and not only in geopolitics, but mainly in the social economic sphere and maybe political sphere, internal policy. But I have one question. You mentioned many times, and I heard about this and read about this in many sources, that in the United States, young generation is more and more moving to the left and support not Biden, but to his alternative inside Democratic Party, to Senator Sanders, is really very big among young generation of Americans. Is it true or not? Maybe you will comment this again. You said about this half a year ago, but time is running, and we have new people who are watching our YouTube channel and so on. So, what is the situation now?
Yeah, if you believe the evidence, the polls conducted by the public opinion surveys conducted by many different public opinion survey companies in the last 5 or 6 years have shown about half of young people ages 18 to 29 have a favorable view of socialism, whatever they think socialism might be. This is a new phenomenon in the USA, and it makes sense given their experience with unaffordable higher education, with very constrained job opportunities. This is an important phenomenon of the rise of support for socialism. The largest socialist organization in the US, the Democratic Socialists of America, just a few years ago had 8,000 members. It just hit 80,000. And it's still 80,000. 4 zeros. 8 followed by 4 zeros. And it's growing, continuing to grow. I mean, there are millions, many millions of people in the USA who say they favor socialism. Now, what exactly that means, whether it means something like Sweden or whether it means public ownership and economic planning, I think those half of the young people who have that view, they're not sure. But I think what it means is they've grown up under capitalism, they don't like it, and socialism sounds like it would be a different system that would place the needs of people ahead of the needs of the rich and big business. So that's what they want. Exactly what it would be, few have a clear idea. So my hope is that we will see a growing socialist movement in the US and in the West, a continuing growth, and that this in the future will become a contender for power.
So I can say that in Russia we also have big changes in the mentality of young generation. And first of all, it's strange, but in our country, socialism is very much associated with Soviet Union. And now we have a new trend. My generation is explaining to young generations that Soviet Union was not paradise. That we had some negative features of this bureaucratic system. But people are looking for something. And because they don't see now positive trends, they don't see hopes for the future development of this system, oligarchic, bureaucratic, semi-periphery capitalism, which we have in Russia. They're looking back to the Soviet Union, and we really had a lot of very positive results in Soviet Union. And by the way, next year we have 30th anti-anniversary, 30 years after destruction of the Soviet Union. And we want to talk about this in our events, in our dialogues, in our YouTube channel. And David, of course, we will invite you to participate at least via internet, or maybe we have a chance to invite you again to Moscow and Leningrad, or St. Petersburg, if everything is perfect next year, at least summer, autumn. And it is topic for the future. And thank you very much for these explanations. I hope we have opportunity to talk again about this post-neoliberal era with some details, and you present your book. By the way, we can talk also about publication in Russia. If your publisher says that it is okay, you promise to ask him, is it possible to publish in Russian updated version of your book? If you have all rights, we can do this. Or you said that you have all rights for this?
No, the publisher has the rights.
The publisher. So it's our concrete, positive end of our dialogue. So let's make your book in Russian.
Well, I would very much look forward to that, and very much look forward to actually visiting Russia in person again.
Yes, thank you very much, David. And thank you for everybody who were with us. Спасибо большое, дорогие друзья. Это был диалог с профессором Дэвидом Котцем. Goodbye, David. До свидания.